So tonight's topic is patience, or patience, which is how it was posted. And I wanted to, somehow that topic popped into mind maybe yesterday when it was getting to be time to think of something to talk about again. Just to let you know, I think I counted almost 100 online talks over the last 2 years archived, maybe 90 or so. So we'll put the link to those up if you don't already have it. And just if any topic is sort of coming up for you and you see a topic there that's kind of relevant, you might want to go back and check it out. What discussion we had about that in the past. So we have talked about in the past the paramitas, of course, and patience is one of those transcendent virtues. But I just thought it'd be good to talk about it almost as a world unto itself. It seems to be something that's not particularly strongly cultivated in let's say, in our world these days. For example, we have a news cycle that's something like 10 days. And if you want to find out something beyond that about something that happened, some big event like, let's say, floods in New Orleans, and it's gone because people don't have the patience to really stay with topics and follow them through. So, of course, one way of talking about this is we talk about attention deficit disorder, ADD. But it seems to be more than just an individual diagnosis these days, but it's possible that we could say the entire culture is suffering from it. The inability to rest the mind in a particular direction and also persist in an area of activity that might be fruitful for us, i.e. such as practice or any particular cultivation. The overriding modality is, how can we get there fast? So whenever you want to get there someplace fast, obviously that's the antithesis of patience. Speed and patience are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. So I thought I could share this little anecdote that I shared earlier today with you about my teacher Trungpa Rinpoche. At a certain point in my life in 1978, I went to Karma Chilling in Vermont to be the director of that place. And when I first got there, Trungpa Rinpoche had made a visit. He would come there 3 or 4 times a year and visit and spend time with the staff there and also probably do a public program, but spend extra time with the people who were there all year round staffing the place, which grew over the years to, being, maybe at peak, 40 to 50 people on staff. But at that time there was hundreds of people on staff because there had been a building expansion. So we had to kind of thin that out. But he was standing in the rock garden, which is in the central courtyard, and somehow either we were I think he was chatting with a bunch of senior staff, and he made this comment. He said, that he had become enlightened as a result of working with us because he had to develop patience, so much patience. And that was sort of an interesting comment. Working with others requires patience. Working with ourselves requires patience. So just to frame patience, it's sometimes interesting to look at what it isn't. And classically, in terms of the paramitas, the antithesis of patience is aggression. That's the biggest obstacle to experiencing patience, is any kind of aggression. Meaning, how do we get aggressive? Why do we get aggressive? And maybe you could say it's because we have some kind of agenda, right, that we have of getting from point A to point B, and we want to get there in a certain time frame, and it's not happening. So we begin to sort of push our agenda And usually that results in a kind of imbalance and a lack of skillfulness and lack of insight. So it kind of clouds. We're not really clear at that point exactly how to go about things. So, when things are not going the way we hoped, then there's this notion of developing patience or experiencing our impatience. So we also, in addition to experiencing aggression, we experience a lack of gentleness, and a lack of clarity and a lack of precision. Impatience destroys all those things: gentleness, clarity, and precision. If you think about it for a minute, probably the biggest obstacle that most of us have to actually doing deep meditation practice and staying with it is patience. In other words, you can't sit there. You can't stay with the technique. You want to do something different. You want to or why isn't this working? Why aren't I calm? Why am I not peaceful? Why is my mind not clear? So, in a sense, coming back to Trungpa Rinpoche's comment about patience, and developing that through working with the students, it was a very witty comment in a way. So, we think this is something we can cultivate, which is sort of an interesting point of view. How do we cultivate that? Well, first of all, you have to think it's a good idea. Personally, I'm convinced that it's a good idea. Because without it, what do you have? You have the mad scramble. You have the edgy, anxiety-driven. In a way, you could say anxiety has a lot to do with not being willing to experience things in a patient way. So we start getting more and more stressed out. Like, I need this to happen sooner. So I think tonight what I'd like to do is maybe have a little bit more participation. I want to experiment with that rather than me, prattling on about it. The topic is patience. Your guess is as good as mine, as Rinpoche used to say. What are we working with? Who feels this topic is relevant to them? Before I pass it over to you, I just want to say that it might be helpful to say what patience isn't, which is a kind of, at least in the Buddhist sense, a kind of a dull, thick, ignorant kind of quality. Which is funny because sometimes, it could be mistaken for patience, right? So we're talking about clarity with pacing mixed in with it. That's what we mean, as opposed to not caring. Indifference could make you sort of seem patient, and also a kind of ignoring or thick, stupid quality could make you seem like you're actually patient. But we're talking about the awakened version of patience, where there's clarity about what needs to get done, but there's a sense of skillful means in terms of applying at the right activity at the right time. So what I'd like to do is invite you at this point, just so we have a little more of a group discussion tonight, to go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, in a second window in your browser, and then let's just entertain and try to launch from your comments and questions tonight on this particular topic, obviously. Again, if you just joined us, you're going to facebook.com/David Nichtern on a second page in your browser, and welcoming at this point comments, questions, thoughts about this particular topic. So we'll launch from there. If you are watching on the archives, obviously you cannot participate in that way. I hope that's clear if you're watching a recording. However, I will read the questions, so you'll at least have a chance to see what it is that people were contributing live. So, wow. Marianne is having a monsoon in Costa Rica, but will try to stay connected. Okay, and while she's still connected, she's saying, for me, patience is connected to trust that something will happen, something will work out. Okay, so there's a kind of faith or trust there. Interesting point. There's probably still underlying that an agenda, which is fine. Relatively speaking, we would like things to go a certain way. Like if we're involved in a business negotiation or something like that, and we want some kind of resolution, it will happen. So again, please write in your questions and comments now so we can kind of get a discussion going on. Hi, Nanette from Long Island. Where on Long Island are you? Let's see if we can get anybody writing in at this point. Okay, Rebecca, jumping in there. First thought that comes to my mind regarding patience as it is relevant to my experience is allowing. Okay. Yeah, some kind of openness or surrender seems to be an interesting piece of the puzzle. And also, maybe we don't know the outcome, or not knowing. But even as we're shaping an outcome, allowing for things to change, for things to be different as they go, and letting go, I think, which is the allowing part, letting go so that you can achieve clarity. It's interesting, sometimes when you're working on a problem, you're sort of digging into it heavily, and then at a certain point you just relax your mind and allow yourself to see the whole thing in a fresh way, particularly when it comes to, trying to resolve something, conflict or something like that. So yeah, that's a good one, Rebecca, allowing, which maybe we could also sort of add the notion of letting go into a space beyond your sort of narrower expectations. Let's see what Joe. Okay, Joe is saying, David, great topic for me tonight, as today was the first day of a new school year. Joe works with young kids, so you can imagine. Trying so hard to stay with the breath and have have patience with a few of the students that are just doing what seems natural for them. Any advice for a fellow to have patience for teachers? Is it the teachers you're impatient with or the students? I got the feeling that it's maybe more the student. Any advice for a fellow to have patience for teachers? Okay, I'm going to assume you mean having patience for the students. It seems like that it's an interesting thing you're talking about, Joe, there, because it just came to mind, like raising children requires a tremendous amount of patience. And one of the interesting things about kids, and since you work with younger kids, is their physical energy is very much more heightened than ours is usually. And I remember when I was younger, my parents telling me that Bob Richards, who was the guy who used to be on a Wheaties box, who was a decathlon champion, tried to just simply match his physical activity to one of his kids who was about 5. So he just basically made every physical gesture that the kid made for about an hour. The idea was that he was completely exhausted at the end of the hour. So there's some notion of not just matching energy for energy, and having a different platform maybe for your energy than they do for theirs. And that being not a kind of dull patience, but a smart patience. And as people are learning, often repetition is an important piece of the pie for them to learn. Anything you learn a lot through repetition or becoming familiar with something. So it was interesting, on my retreat in Nova Scotia, the Sakyong Mipam has been recommending to us that we memorize important texts, which is very, very traditional in Buddhism, and that by memorizing, your mind becomes more familiar with them. So that process, is considered a punishment for children in today's school, right? If you're bad, you have to stay after school and write whatever was on the blackboard 100 times, rather than seeing that as a good learning technique. So maybe, Joe, you could just say a little more specifically about what's trying your patience. But you're also saying something about staying with the breath, and I want to just be clear about that with post-meditation practice. I don't recommend actually staying with the breath. It's too deliberate. When we're on the cushion, there's a sort of deliberate cultivation of mindfulness and working with the breathing. But in post-meditation or in the field, I think what we're talking about more is just a sense of coming back. That would be the to the feeling being there and present and with what you're doing. A very light touch of coming back and then letting go, or disowning, as we used to say, disowning. So maybe think of that approach as a little too deliberate and a little too heavy-handed. And you could sort of think more like a fly landing on the water, just touching in. Everybody could just do it right now, actually. Just sort of touch in to where you are. You look around for a minute. And in a sense, you're totally releasing the situation into a kind of field of ease and awareness for just a moment, and disowning it completely, and then taking a fresh start. So I would look at that as more of the post-meditation technique, rather than trying to cling to mindfulness desperately while these kids are rowing you down the river. But maybe you could say more. I'd be curious, Joe, what is happening there that makes you feel impatient, or try your patience like more specifically. Okay, I see we have a lot of comments, so I think people are jumping in. Let's see what we got. Joe writes, "Thank you, David, for the teachings. Thank you, David, for the teachings. Thank you, David, for the teachings." That's very funny, Joe. Mai is saying, "I've become more patient with my sons as I've aged." Well, I'm assuming that they probably have as well. "I'm not as quick to react and put in my 2 cents. Oh, smart mama. And I allow time to think about what to say." Yeah. So that's a very interesting one. And as a parent, I know we're just using this as one example, but also maybe as a metaphor, that that thing where we always want to jump in and kind of correct the situation or manage it, or get our 2 cents in, of holding back, even though that has the sort of potential to be a kind of limiting dimension of patience. Somehow that can be real wisdom at times, to not spurt out every piece of insight that you have right on the spot, and let people go for themselves, and let them drive for a minute, let them learn what's going on for themselves. So Dawn Tepperman is saying, "Patience is when I'm open to the moment, enfolding as it will without being caught up in my own perspective." Yeah, I think that's sort of what we're talking about with agenda. Or have a lighter handle on your agenda. Have an agenda, but a light touch on it, so you can guide, and as things shift and change, you still can direct. Just like, if you're steering a car, you don't just grab onto the wheel for dear life, and you'll crack the car up that way. So if you're water skiing, you indicate direction by very small movements. Anything where you're engaging motion or movement or intention, there needs to be enough of a light touch so that you can feel, the fluidity of the activity. So let's see. E. Alexander Gerster is saying patience equals mindful wisdom. Okay. Let's see what other people are saying. Emma from London. "I have made some poor decisions recently based on lack of patience." Yeah, wow. Yikes. the shoe fits. Patience is therefore about firm decision-making for me. This has been a very hard lesson to learn. Well, I think that's really, really a seriously good point, because when we make decisions without patience, often the thing that is suffered is perspective. We lose the sense of perspective, push too hard. I've made a lot of wrong decisions that way. And they tend to compound, you know. Once you have caused that kind of off-balance decision to come through, then it's going to create consequences. And then if you're impatient with those consequences, you just have a ripple effect. I think sometimes it can result in we're very, very frustrated, you know, with the kind of rippling concentric circles of impatience just going out and out and out, and can be very, very destructive, you know. So, good one, Emma. Yeah, understood. Excuse me. So Nanette is saying, patience is needed when listening to several elder people talking all at once, who are not hearing or listening to others, without needing to respond. I wouldn't limit that to several elder people, but probably many gatherings that we're involved with. So it's interesting also, as part of the retreat that we did and sort of part of the Shambhala program these days, they've sort of included this idea of deep listening, or also listening in an embodied way, embodied listening. And you know, those of you who've done dyads or those kind of things, at first it might seem a little gimmicky, but it's shocking almost how, when we're just listening, when you do a dyad, and you could try this with somebody if you want, you just pick a topic, and the first person talks for 5 minutes, and the second person only listens without chipping in, without chiming in. Then you switch, so everybody gets a shot at it. And the person who's listening is deep listening, is, you know, very attentively listening, but not sort of confirming or denying, or then going, oh yeah, I had a dog like that myself once, you know. So the idea of truly listening gets more and more difficult, obviously, the more skin we have in the game, more at stake. So this kind of deep listening, for example, for couples can be extremely challenging, because there might be quite a bit of loaded up, unlistened to, you know, content, and then people really feel like they haven't been heard for a longer period of time. So it gets frustrating. But how to listen without commenting and still be awake? Of course, there's the kind of listening without comments, like And lately, I've noticed that many people, if you're having a conversation with them, and then you start to talk, and they're not that interested in what you have to say, they'll go right to texting. It's fucking believable what we're all doing with that stuff. So, you know, that's an exaggerated case, but that's just because you can text to somebody outside there. But what'll mainly happen is the person will just start to think about what they want to think about. So the art of listening deeply and not loading up while the other person's talking, not loading up for bear for the response, is something that we can all practice. It's pretty cool. So let's see what else people are saying. So Christy is saying, can you feel annoyance and aggression while you are practicing patience? Well, that's exactly what you are experiencing, and that's exactly why you are practicing patience. So I have a situation right now that I'm feeling annoyed at for a number of reasons, but I'm keeping at it, noting that I'm annoyed, while I'm also reminding myself that there is something for me to figure out about the annoyance. Well, that's astute. I can't quite see what it is yet, but I have faith that the awareness will come. It isn't quite take away the physical annoyance. it doesn't quite, I guess, doesn't quite take away the physical annoyance. It isn't quite taking away the physical annoyance, but maybe it will. Ooh, okay. So, another thing the patience that we're talking about as a paramita isn't based on is repressing anything. So that's pretty intense. If we could just manage it or hold it down, our annoyance, then we would be being patient. So maybe looking at it as not exactly something you're trying to get rid of, but maybe more sort of understand more deeply. As you said, I think the key thing what you said is there's something for me to figure out about being annoyed. Nobody's sort of forcing you to be annoyed, Christy, right? That's a choice that we're making from our end. I mean, you could even leave if it's not to your liking. How about that? Just get up and walk out of the room. David! Unorthodox Buddhist solutions. But what I'm saying is that once we do stay in the room, how we're in the room, there's a lot of choices open to us. And if we're getting annoyed. So the twist there is like we talk about, probably I've said it 18 times and you've heard it 30 times elsewhere, but the idea of this great Tibetan teacher named Atisha Dipankara, who was very famous scholar and practitioner, and who's one of the principal two people who brought Buddhism to Tibet. He got invited to teach at Tibet, and he heard the Tibetans were so benevolent that he was afraid he wouldn't be able to practice patience. This is, we're talking here about, I think about 1,200 years ago, something like that. So the question then is, he said, well, since I won't be able to practice my patience with the Tibetans because they're so kind and gentle, that's what he heard anyhow, he had a Bengali tea boy, a chaiwala, who was irritating, annoying, aggressive, sarcastic, whatever. Add your own list there, add your own adjectives. And he determined that he would take the tea boy with him. So then, even if in the good circumstances, he would still be able to practice his patience. Now, how many of us would really have the kind of vision to actually invite the obstacle along with us? We spend our entire lives trying to get rid of obstacles, And this is the Mahayana approach, is like to see it as rife with opportunity and potentiality. So, of course, the joke was that there were plenty of obnoxious Tibetans. He didn't have any problem practicing his patience. But we can identify usually somebody in our environment. It sounds like, Christy, that you found your chaiwala, your tea boy or girl. And you could just have a good run of appreciation, because it is true that you won't be able to, you won't be able to practice your patience that well without that person. If you think about it, when things are going smoothly, we try to navigate towards things going smoothly, and when they are going smoothly, we're probably not making much spiritual progress. And I'm not saying you should go out looking for trouble. It'll find you. But flipping the view of what's happening when you're in trouble is usually that's the time when you're actually learning the most. That makes us poor proponents of going out and trying to seek those controversial situations. But, the world we're in is completely rife with tension and conflict, and just trying to make ourselves comfortable through a kind of ignoring of all that is probably not a complete strategy, and it doesn't sharpen your sword in any way, shape, or form. So, but that's a good one. That's a good one. And obviously, if you have any thoughts after we talk about your question, just follow up on it. And if you want to follow up with somebody else's question, you can write directly to them, and you can, as we say, take it offline. That's a good the retreat I was on was, the Sakyong was teaching a lot, but also there was time for me to talk to some of my other Sangha friends and compare notes, and that's a very, very powerful dimension of our practice is Sangha and comparing notes, and please feel free, even if it's virtual, that you can follow up with somebody if you would like to. Let's see if anybody else is chiming in here. So for example, responded to Nanette's point about the elder people, said, like being with my father-in-law who pretends to hear what you're saying and respond as though he heard, but then you find out that he doesn't have his hearing aid in and hasn't heard anything. You gotta love it. Let's see what else anybody's up to here. Okay. Hi, Mary Jean Valentino from Delaware. Eleanor Arliss. Those are sort of some newer names. Not sure if I've seen you, and if you have, welcome back, and if you haven't, welcome. So Bill Manning is saying patience is endurance with hope. And thank you for writing that in, Bill. Depending on how you define the terms, I might temper your remarks, at least from my own point of view, because that could be taken as the kind of just wait it out, and then it'll get better. Hope is a notion that something's going to get better, whereas, for example, it could get worse. Right? There's only three possibilities. It could get better, it could get worse, or it could stay the same. So hope is usually connected with the idea that it's going to get better, and therefore there'll be relief in the future, and therefore we can kind of let it slide for the moment. And I'm not sure that's always what we're exactly referring to in the Buddhist sense of practicing patience, is you recognize that it's hopeless already, in the sense of that you're not really working from a base of hoping this will happen and afraid that'll happen, which always traps you in that kind of dualistic framework of hope and fear. And certainly Trungpa Rinpoche used to, really talk about unhitching hope and fear as the horses of your chariot. But some kind of real stamina or endurance, we're kind of, patience builds a certain kind of strength, of not, it's kind of weak and whiny to want immediate gratification. That produces a kind of sense of weakness. The mind is not strong when you need immediate gratification. And a lot of times meditation practice and deeper practice is just developing strength in the mind so that we don't have to get the immediate gratification that the mind is sort of cranking up all the time. So I think the endurance thing I like, and the hope thing depends on how you're talking about it. So Justine is saying, my lack of patience continually reveals my extreme arrogance. Oh, my goodness. My lack of patience continually reveals my extreme arrogance. Well, Justine, if we were sitting around a fireplace, I would definitely get into that one with you. So, first of all, extreme arrogance that's like an extreme sport, right? Like, rather than just regular old garden variety arrogance. So I wonder what that is, that you're talking about there. Partly from knowing you, but what you're really referring to right now. Would you mind writing in and talking more about what you're referring to there in terms of extreme arrogance, what you mean by that? And a little more about the relationship between lack of patience and it sounds like the extreme arrogance is the cause, the lack of patience is the symptom, and so when you look at the symptom and pull it away, it's revealing the underlying cause. But I'm curious what the underlying cause of the extreme arrogance is, if you want to go back into causal dimension of this a little further. I'm going to invite that if you feel like writing in, Justine, okay? And then it's funny because Marilyn Freeman is saying, is patience associated with uncoupling, which is a great word, Marilyn. I like the way you're choosing that word, from outcome. And I think the thing that I usually come to saying on these things, Marilyn, is lightening up your grip on the outcome. So when I've decided over years to use the term, instead of dropping your agenda, relaxing your agenda. Having a lighter touch on the agenda. I don't think it's so bad to have an agenda. You might have an agenda of trying to be a good person. You might have an agenda of trying to be patient. So, but if there's too much tightness around the agenda, then I think that's what. So uncoupling from the outcome in the sense of lightening up your grip on the on the incessantly persistent kind of focus on a particular outcome. Anyhow, that's just a little bit of a subtle thing. So Joe is saying, so it would seem that I can see some students as your tiwala. Absolutely. You should. God, if you're teaching young children, you should have at least one tiwala in the class. And I'm willing to bet, Joe, pick one or two out. I'll bet that by the end of the year, those are the kids you really are in love with. Because that's how that goes. Usually the tiwala is really triggering something in ourselves that once we open up to, we can see that person a little bit more completely. It's always interesting to look at the mirror dimension of that. Okay, let's see if anybody else is writing in for us at this point. Yeah. So if you, by the way, since some of you have joined more recently, please, if you're joining us now, remember that you open a second window in your browser and go to facebook.com/DavidNickTurn. If you write in right below the picture there, usually we found those were not coming through crisply enough. And so if you have written there, I'm just looking if anybody has tonight written there. Yeah, maybe Christina has written in tonight from Cornell, and Christy. No, that was last week. Okay, so if you would like to write in, and you just joined us recently, go to facebook.com/DavidNickTurn, and that's where you'll see the scroll of comments to write in on. Okay, so please do feel free to follow up. I'm kind of, as most of you who know me know, I like to just, go bat the ball back and forth. Sometimes I say to students or friends, hit the ball back. Let's have a conversation about it. Harder to do in the virtual domain, but taking a shot at that tonight. So if we've had a little chat and you want to go further with it, please do so. Let's see what people are saying. Justine wrote back. Good. Thanks, Justine. Meaning that I feel my arrogance. This was, if you remember, the comment was about the impatience revealing the underlying arrogance. Meaning that I feel my arrogance arises from having an agenda that contains the resolve, see arrogant, then the heat from that uses up much of the space, and I find myself impatient to apply more skillful means, and we know what that leads to, a big hot mess. Yeah, so underneath the arrogance, which is what I asked you to, see if you could comment on, is an agenda. A hard agenda, it sounds like. So even more, Justine, if we can keep going, why that agenda? What's the causal factor for that agenda being what it is and being fixed in the way that it is. If you were generalizing, if you could generalize, what's creating that kind of sense of needing to have a strong, powerful agenda that generates sort of impatience in getting it done? What's underneath that? Let's see. Okay, so again, we're in the part of the conversation where we're looking for, comments, questions, and follow-ups on anything you might have said previously or anything that I might have said previously. And what I would say is at this point, let's open it up to, if there was another topic that we've talked about recently or that you've been thinking about recently, and you just want to chat, like, open forum. Let's open it up to that for the last 15 minutes of our hour. So I'm just looking to see if there's any new comments. Rebecca is saying patience is a gift given to others. Wow, that's kind of interesting. That worries me a little bit. Because I'm not sure I would see it that way so much. I mean, of course, you could explain it a little bit more, but it sounds a little bit like two levels are going on, and you're getting to this level of being patient, and then the other person's sort of receiving something. I think it's a correction. For me, patience is a correction oneself makes because you're not completely present. And so therefore it's an adjustment. I don't know, the language of gift given to others is interesting. Rebecca, why don't you say more about that, okay? Because that hits me in a funny way right off the bat. Okay, so Marilyn saying, thank you, David. That's a helpful way to think of it, lightening up the grip. Oh, Marianne is saying, impatience arises when we expect circumstances or people to be other than how they are. Whew. You'd think we would know better by now, don't you? Wouldn't you? Yeah. We're always nudging the circumstances to be more in line with how we wish they were. But the ultimate resolution and relaxation comes from resting in things as they are. And also, once we remove the filter of our own projections, sometimes we could see some distortion in our notion of things as they are. That it's actually, there's some kind of distortion there. So in that regard, it's a big relief when you recognize, we call that emptiness, Marilyn, when you recognize that we're adding our own projections onto other people and probably not seeing them completely clearly, especially when we create an agenda for them to change in a particular way. But I think that's distinct from a clear perception, for example, that somebody is not being mindful about their body or their food or something like that. And you can see other things clearly about other people, but there would be no aggression attached to changing it. It would be purely in the model on the basis of wanting to actually help make them be happy. So if we need somebody to lose weight to make us happy, that's a very different kind of agenda to have. So maybe separating out what in our expectations is really something that is based on compassion, what on it is based on just expanding our comfort zone. So that's a good point, though, that you're making there. So again, I want to open it up if you have a follow-up on any of these things. I think when I talk to Seth this fall, I'm going to see how far along Google Plus is, because I think you can only have 10 people at a time, so that's not enough for us. But if we could have 50 or 100, we could do these things where everybody would see each other, and then and you could actually speak. So, Seth, if you're watching this either now or later, could you look into that? Is there a way we can set this up so it's actually we go live? Because that would be fantastic. Really cool. Let's see if anybody has followed up further. Sorry, everybody takes a minute to look through these, and they're unfortunately not in order. So Rebecca is saying her thought to Justine is to be patient towards the arrogance. That's an interesting thought. Justine, what do you think of that? There's another approach which is coming from old school Trungpa Rinpoche, one possible, of course, patient and kind, non-aggressive towards it, but at the same time, it could be cut. You know, if you know it's there, you've been practicing for a while, we can at a certain point just cut and just, you know, not continue that to perpetuate that. So I think it depends who you're talking to, Rebecca, in terms of knowing what the skillful means is going to be for that person. Arrogance and aggression is definitely something that keeps us from experiencing compassion. No doubt about that. Okay, Justine is saying extreme in terms of arrogance is an adjective to describe level of intensity. Sure, absolutely. Bill Manning is saying, without going too far, I'd suggest impatience is self-oriented instead of other-oriented. Yeah, no doubt about it. That's a good one. We're thinking of ourselves primarily in that context. Let's see if there's any new input. Okay, give a few more rounds to Q&A, and if we don't have them, then we maybe we'll wrap it up. Rebecca's saying another thought: not giving up. Patience is not giving up. That's an interesting one. One of the things that Rinpoche used to say is not giving up on anyone or anything. And of course, that has the ring of compassion too. But that's also, I think, what he was saying. You know, in terms of us working with people and even recognizing when it's difficult. You know, so that's a good one. All right, we'll take a quick look through, and then maybe we'll wrap up for tonight. Okay, I think we've gone through most of the comments. If I missed one, I apologize. Oh, okay. Maybe we'll do this one last. Madeline DeVita. I hope I'm saying your name right, Madeline. It's an unusual spelling of it. Here's a funny. Patience happens in post-menopause. Yeah. Does it? I mean, I completely would have to take your word on that, whether it does or it doesn't. And the full meaning of that will be hidden in the mists of gender for all time, because I can't really comment on it other than my perception from an extremely external point of view. So that's sweet. I think, you know, if I generalize on it, as you get older, you better get more patient, because the quick fix is going to be less accessible. Like in terms of health, for example, gradual working with physical situations, all kinds of deep life issues over time. So if we can't develop patience and we age, that's going to be a double whammy. That's going to be especially painful. Sometimes people just naturally do develop patience as they get older, and sometimes it's just like not really happening, and people get really crabby and impatient, you know, and more power entitled and more entitlement, and kind of that is a sad story when you see that. So that could be one of the ripenings with age, and one of the developing wisdom, compassion, and generosity and patience over time. That's kind of my idea of a sort of more positive version of an older person. They may not run, they may not be sprinting as fast, they may not be as thin or as agile, they may not be as quick, but there's a sense of depth and wisdom that comes along. So, we're living in a culture that cuts people off at the knees as they age. There's no doubt about it on so many levels. And so many of the other cultures that I've visited have a deep respect for that process and that kind of crystallization that comes with aging. So I think we'll cut it there. I just want to say a few things, summing it up. Think about one way to develop patience is just to go slower if you're used to being speedy and fast. For example, sitting down and meditating forces you to go slower. It is really slowing your engine down to the point where now you're just sitting patiently. Many people cannot even do that these days. It's like too intense, too challenging, so we've got to trick them. Meditation's for stress management, it's for anxiety. It's you have to kind of con people in a way into the idea that just simply slowing down and working with the mind and the awareness, actually already you're developing patience by doing that. That's one of the kind of benefits of it. I also want to say that, as we will look into over this next year how I would like a chance to talk more directly to people live. And of course, as most of you know, I do a lot of that. And in particular, I kind of going to keep mentioning this immersion that I'm doing at Kripalu from November 10th to 15th, and really inviting anybody who's been either studying one-to-one with me or attending online. That is a chance in a great setting to spend 5 days. It goes Sunday night to Friday morning, so you have to actually commit and take the time off from work or whatever you have to do. And we're doing more intensive meditation practice, but it's very workable. It's not like a hard-ass retreat. It's a little gentler than that. Great food, great setting. Other programs will be going on. Always good people there, and body work that you can have and stuff like that. But we will be focusing a little bit more on a kind of bigger picture of the Buddhist path, and a chance to really be together and eat meals together and hang out. So I really want to invite anybody who thinks they can do that to try to make that. And maybe even once or twice a year, even if most of our contact is virtual, that we get to be together in a room and practice and study together. So I wanted to emphasize that, and then also just mention the next 3 weeks really I'm touring with Krishna Das. Some of you know that I play guitar with him and produce his records, both of which is happening this fall a bit. So that is going to, I want to invite anybody to come along and chant if you like that practice, and also get a chance to visit in person. And that's this coming weekend. We'll be at Omega Institute, the chant weekend, and the following weekend out in Joshua Tree at the Bhakti Fest, and then the following weekend in Northampton. So as a result of that, for 2 weeks I'll be sort of on the road. It'll be impossible to do these classes. So we'll reconvene in 3 weeks, and I'll post it on the Facebook page. But just for now, you can just put in your calendars, if you like coming to these sessions regularly, that the next one would be Tuesday, September 17th. So we'll be skipping the 3rd and the 10th because I will just be traveling and it will be impossible to do it. Okay? So those are a few thoughts. Thank you all for participating. As you know, these are archived, so we'll post that again. And, if you have a chance to practice patience this week, see if you can also marry it to a sense of humor and delight. So it's not too stiff, not too heavy. Okay, so cheerful evening, everybody, and I'll see you in 3 weeks from tonight.